My name is Renata Cole. I'm 36 years old, and for 11 years I've made my living reading the things people try to hide inside ink. I'm a forensic document examiner. Banks fly me in when a signature looks wrong. Courts pay me to tell them if a will is real. I can look at a stroke of a pen under raking light and tell you if the hand that made it was rushed or drugged or dead 3 weeks before the date at the top of the page. That Saturday, I had two things sitting in my blazer pocket. The first was a folded square of paper with 4 words written on it in my own handwriting. 4 words I was going to say out loud to a room full of people who thought they already knew how this story ended. The second was a photograph on my phone, taken that morning under a jeweler's loupe, of a signature that should not have existed. Nobody in that room knew about either one. They didn't know what I was about to say, and they had no idea what their own paperwork was about to say for me. Welcome back to her final chapter, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever sat at a family table and felt like the only person who hadn't been handed the script, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. It started, like most quiet wars in families, with a memorial invitation designed to look like a celebration. I grew up the middle child in a house where my father, Walter Cole, fixed things for a living. Small engine repair, out of a garage that smelled permanently of two-stroke oil and coffee gone cold. He wasn't a wealthy man by the numbers, but he'd bought a scrap of lakefront property outside Sparrow Falls back in 1987 for $11,000, back when nobody wanted it, and over 37 years he'd built it, board by board, into a 3-bedroom cabin with a dock he'd replanked himself every spring. I have a habit, one that used to embarrass me at dinner parties before I learned to just own it. I read handwriting, not like a fortune teller, like a technician. I notice pen pressure, letter slant, the tiny hesitations where somebody's hand pauses before signing something they're not sure about. My husband Dale calls it my lie detector eyes. My father used to hand me birthday cards from relatives just to watch me tell him correctly which ones had been signed in a hurry in the car outside. It's not a party trick. It's 14 years of training, 3 certifications, and a stack of case files I can't talk about because of confidentiality agreements. I've testified in probate court 11 times. I've never once been wrong on the stand. My father died in March, quietly, in his sleep, at 71. He left behind me my younger half-brother Trent, from his second marriage, and Trent's mother, my stepmother Deb, who married my father when I was 14 and Trent was newborn, and who had spent every year since finding small, polite ways to remind me that the cabin, the tools, the whole life my father built, existed mostly for Trent's benefit. I didn't think much about the cabin after the funeral. I was grieving. I assumed, the way you assume the ground will hold you, that whatever my father had decided was fair would be fair. I should have known better. I read documents for a living. I should have known that the story on paper and the story in a room are not always the same story. The text came from Deb on a Tuesday afternoon in June, 3 months after the funeral, while I was standing in a bank's records room comparing a disputed check endorsement under a magnifier. Hi, hun. Throwing together a little gathering at the lake house June 21st to celebrate your dad's life properly, not just the sad stuff. Bring Dale. We'll also finalize some paperwork on the property while everyone's together. Easier that way. Should be simple. It's what Dad would have wanted. Everyone under one roof again. I read it twice. Finalize some paperwork. I typed back. What paperwork? Nothing to stress about. Just some transfer stuff for the deed. Trent's been the one keeping the place up anyway. You know how your dad felt about keeping it in the family the right way. It's what he would have wanted, Ren. Don't make this complicated. I set my phone face down on the light table. My hands, which 20 seconds earlier had been perfectly steady comparing loop closures on a signature, were not steady anymore. It's what Dad would have wanted. Deb had used that phrase on me at least 4 times over the years. When I'd questioned why my father's retirement account beneficiary had quietly become Trent Primary the year I got married and moved states. When I'd asked why the cabin's property taxes were being paid from an account with my father's name and Deb's name, and not mine, despite my name being on an early deed draft he'd shown me once, laughing, saying someday, "Ren Bear, this'll have your name on it too." I hadn't seen that draft again in 15 years. I'd assumed it evaporated the way old family promises do. Now there was going to be a party, and paperwork, and I was being told, gently, cheerfully, exactly what my father would have wanted, by the one person who had never once asked me what I wanted. Here is the part I didn't say out loud to anyone for a long time, not even to Dale. When my father married Deb, I was 14, angry, and grieving my mother, who had died 2 years earlier of a stroke at 41. Deb was 29. She was warm in the specific way that made adults trust her instantly and made me, a kid who'd just watched her whole world collapse, suspicious instantly. I wasn't fair to her. I'll say that plainly. I was a hard kid to love for a few years there. But something shifted after Trent was born. I watched, over the next 2 decades, as small decisions accumulated the way sediment does, invisible day to day, undeniable when you finally step back and look at the riverbed. My father paid for Trent's truck at 17, a $34,000 F-150, financed partly through a loan co-signed against the cabin's equity. I found out about that loan by accident 5 years later, when a title search for an unrelated case crossed my desk and I recognized the parcel number out of pure professional habit. My stomach dropped in a conference room in front of 2 paralegals I didn't know. When I got married at 29, my father gave Dale and me $4,000 toward the wedding. Generous, genuine, and I loved him for it. The same year, Trent's down payment on his first house came to $62,000 gifted outright. I know the number because Deb told me herself at Thanksgiving, glowing, saying, "Isn't your dad just the most generous man?" Clearly not doing the math the way I automatically do everything, down to the decimal. I never confronted my father about any of it. That's the part I'm least proud of, and also the part I understand best now. Every year I told myself, he still calls me every Sunday. He still remembers I hate cilantro. He still calls me Ren Bear. I kept a ledger in my head of every small proof that I still mattered to him, because I was terrified that if I ever added it all up honestly, the total would tell me something about myself I didn't want to know. That maybe love, real love, hadn't been divided between us evenly, and that I'd spent 30 years quietly negotiating for scraps and calling it a relationship. That's the truth under the principle. It was never really about the cabin. It was about needing, even now, even after his death, to prove that I had counted. That I hadn't been the disappointing daughter who left for the city and came back only for holidays. That some part of what my father built had been built, even a little, with me in mind. So when Deb texted, "It's what Dad would have wanted," what she was really doing, whether she knew it or not, was reaching straight into that old, unhealed place and turning the key. I called my best friend Priya that night. Priya has known me since grad school, back when I was learning ink chromatography in a windowless lab and she was finishing her law degree 2 floors up. "Don't go," she said, before I'd even finished the story. "I mean it, Ren. You already know what this is. They're not inviting you to grieve. They're inviting you to witness your own erasure and then sign a form agreeing it happened. It's a memorial, Priya. It's a closing, with finger sandwiches." She let that sit a second. "You do this for strangers every week. You look at a piece of paper and you tell them the truth whether they want to hear it or not. Why is it different when it's your own family?" "Because it's my own family." "That's not a reason. That's a reason to be more careful, not less." I heard her sigh, the particular sigh she does when she loves someone and is about to say something they won't like. "You're going to go anyway, aren't you?" "I have to see the paperwork, Priya. If there's a deed transfer sitting on a table waiting for my signature, I need to know exactly what it says before I'm standing next to it with people watching." "Then look at everything first. Everything. Before you walk in that door. Promise me that." I promised her. I didn't fully understand yet how much that promise was about to matter. The gap between what was promised and what was real, Deb had said, a little gathering. When Dale and I pulled up the gravel drive at 11 that Saturday morning, there were 19 cars parked along the tree line, a rented white tent staked into the lawn my father used to mow himself, and a catering van with its back doors open, trays of shrimp cocktails sweating in the June heat. A banner strung between 2 pines read, "Celebrating Walter's life and our family's future." I stood there a full 10 seconds just reading that second half of the sentence. "Simple gathering," Dale muttered beside me. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. Sensory contrast, the worn and the performed. Inside, I found my father's old canvas tool bag shoved into a corner of the mudroom, the strap he'd restitched with dental floss because he refused to buy a new one, sitting under a pyramid of gift bags from a wine shop in the city, 8 bottles at what I'd guessed, professionally, was north of $60 each. Someone had moved his reading glasses off the kitchen windowsill, where they'd sat since March, untouched, like a held breath. In their place sat a stack of glossy printed programs with his photo on the front, a photo I didn't recognize, professionally retouched, his smile just slightly too even. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment with my father's broken glasses case in my hand and understood, with total clarity, that I was standing inside a stage set. What I found alone. At noon, I slipped away to use the bathroom down the hall from what used to be my father's study. The door was ajar. On the desk, his desk, the one he'd built from reclaimed barnwood the year I turned 20, sat a manila folder, and on top of it, unmistakably, a deed transfer document and a copy of a will I had never seen before. I closed the door behind me. I told myself I had 90 seconds before someone would notice I was missing. I photographed every page. The will was dated 4 months before my father died. December, not the June 2019 will I knew existed, the one our family attorney, Marian Ashby, had drafted years earlier and had personally told me still stood, back when I'd asked her at the funeral, mostly out of professional habit, mostly because a small cold part of me had already started keeping watch. This December will left the cabin, in its entirety, to Trent. And the signature at the bottom, my father's signature, was wrong. I knew it in under 4 seconds, the way you know a stranger's voice on the phone isn't who they claim to be. The pen lift after the W was absent. My father always lifted his pen after the capital W in Walter. A hitch from an old wrist injury, present in every single sample of his handwriting I had ever studied, including 20 years of birthday cards I still owned. This signature flowed through the W without pause. The baseline was too straight, too controlled, for a 71-year-old man with early arthritis in his right hand. It was good. It was very good. It was not his. 3 small, cruel comments, landing like bricks. Back outside, balancing a paper plate I had no appetite for, Deb's sister Carol found me by the drink table. "You look thin, Renata. Grief diet?" She laughed like it was a gift she was giving me. 10 minutes later, Trent's fiancée, Ashlyn, whom I'd met exactly twice, touched my arm and said, "It's just so nice that you could make time to come up from the city. Trent said you're always so busy with work." The word busy came out with air quotes I could hear even though her fingers never moved. And then Carol again, refilling her wine, not even lowering her voice. "Some people show love by showing up every week for 30 years. Other people show up for the reading of the will." She smiled at me over the rim of her glass like she'd said something clever instead of something cruel. I didn't respond to any of it. I was doing math in my head. I was thinking about pen pressure and baseline drift and the fact that my father's actual handwriting sample sat photographed on my phone next to a forgery good enough to fool almost anyone alive, except, as it happened, me. The second use of the phrase at 1:30, Deb gathered everyone under the tent for what she called just a few words, and asked me, specifically, publicly, to come stand beside her. "Renata," she said, one hand light and warm on my shoulder, performing warmth for an audience of 40. "Your father loved this place so much, and we all know how hard these last few months have been. I think the kindest thing we can do, the thing that honors him best, is to finish this today, together, as a family. It's what Dad would have wanted." She turned to the crowd, smiling. "Isn't it?" 40 faces turned toward me. Somewhere near the back, I saw Trent look down at his shoes. I felt the folded square of paper in my blazer pocket, the 4 words I'd written down that morning after I got the photographs, right before I left for the lake. I hadn't planned to need them yet. I was about to need them sooner than I thought. Stay with me, because what happened next, I planned out standing alone in a stranger's, no, my own father's, study in the 90 seconds it took to photograph 4 pages of paper. Deb produced the folder herself, right there under the tent, with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment more than once. Marian Ashby was not present. I noted that immediately, professionally, the way I note every absence in a room where a legal document is about to be signed. In her place stood a notary I didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with a laminated badge clipped to her blouse, holding a pen with a little ceremonial flourish, like she was there to hand out a diploma. "We just need your signature here, hun," Deb said, sliding the transfer document across a folding table someone had set up beside the dessert cart. Acknowledging the property passes per your father's wishes. She tapped the December will, the forged one, sitting open beside it for effect. It's all here in black and white. He wanted this handled cleanly, without drama, while we're all together. Her voice dropped, gentle, final. It's what Dad would have wanted, Renata. 3 times now. Third and final. The tent had gone quiet in that specific way a room goes quiet when it senses a performance reaching its climax. Somebody's champagne flute clinked once against a plate and then stopped, as if even the glass knew to be still. I looked at the document. I looked at the notary, who was already uncapping her stamp, clearly expecting this to take 90 seconds and end with cake. I let the silence sit. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nobody moved. Deb's smile, held that long without anything happening behind it, began very slightly to strain at the corners, the first honest thing her face had done all day. I reached into my blazer pocket, not for a pen. I set my phone on the folding table, screen up, and pulled up the photograph I'd taken 40 minutes earlier of the exact same document currently lying in front of 40 witnesses. Before I sign anything, I said, and I made sure my voice carried the way it does in a courtroom, calm, level, unhurried. I want everyone here to look at this signature with me, just for a second, because I do this professionally, and I noticed something. Deb's hand twitched toward the folder. Renata, this really isn't the… It'll take 30 seconds, I said, not unkindly, and I placed my finger just above the capital W in my father's signature, the real one, from a birthday card dated 2 years ago, side by side on my screen with the signature on the table. My father had a wrist injury from a table saw accident in 2003. Every single time he signed his name, every card, every check, every document I have ever seen him produce in 36 years, his pen lifted just slightly right after this letter. I traced it in the air. It's called a pen lift. It's involuntary. It's one of the most reliable markers we use in signature verification because it's physically difficult to fake consistently under pressure. I looked up. This signature doesn't have one. The notary's flourish pen had stopped moving entirely. That doesn't mean anything, Deb said, too fast. People's signatures change. They do, I agreed. So let's look at the baseline. I pointed. My father had early arthritis in that hand. Every signature from the last 3 years of his life drifts slightly downward across the page. You can see it right here, in this card from his birthday, 8 months before he died. I tapped my phone screen. This signature runs perfectly straight, for a man who, by December, could barely hold a coffee cup steady without wincing. I let that land. I'd like someone to explain that to me. Deb tried again, a second attempt, thinner this time. Maybe he had a good day. Maybe… There's also the matter of the notary seal, I said, turning to the woman with the badge, whose face had gone the particular shade of pale that I have, professionally, come to recognize very well. May I ask when you notarized this? Because Nevada state law requires the signer to be physically present, and my father died on March the 14th. This will is dated December the 9th. I paused, letting the arithmetic do the work it was built to do. Were you present with my father in December, ma'am? Because I have his hospice intake records showing he was in a care facility 2 states away that entire month, unable to hold a pen without assistance. The notary set her stamp down on the table very slowly, like it had gotten heavy. Deb tried a third time, reaching for the folder itself now, physically, as though she could simply take the evidence back into her own hands and make the last 2 minutes not have happened. You're twisting things, Renata. You always do this. You always have to make everything so… I'm not twisting anything, I said. And for the first time all day, I let my voice go quiet instead of loud. Because I have learned, in 11 years of courtrooms, that quiet is what actually lands. I photographed this document 40 minutes ago in my father's study. I've already sent copies, along with the hospice records and a comparison report, to Marion Ashby, our family's actual estate attorney, the one who drafted the will that's still legally valid from 2019, which does not say what this one says. I looked around the tent, at 40 faces I'd known my whole life and several I'd never seen before. I don't owe anyone in this family a signature today. I never did. What I owe my father is the truth about what happened to his handwriting after he could no longer speak for himself. I picked my phone back up off the table. My hand, I noticed distantly, had gone completely steady again. Marion's expecting Deb's call by Monday, I said. I'd get ahead of it if I were you. Marion Ashby called me herself 2 hours later, while Dale was driving us home in silence broken only by the hum of the highway. She'd already opened the comparison report on her laptop. Renata, she said, I need you to send me everything you have. Today. This isn't a family disagreement anymore. This is elder fraud, and depending on who drafted that will, it may be forgery on top of it. By the following Wednesday, the county had opened a formal probate contest. The notary, it turned out, had notarized the document from her own kitchen table, never having laid eyes on my father, a favor for a family friend of Deb's who ran the wine shop that had supplied those 8 $60 bottles. She lost her commission within the month. Deb hired a lawyer of her own, who, according to Marion, spent their first meeting mostly asking whether there was any way to make the whole thing just go away quietly. There wasn't. The 2019 will, the real one, the one that split the cabin 50-50 between me and Trent, the arrangement my father had actually made, in full possession of his own steady, pen-lifting hand, was reinstated by the court in August. I want to be honest about what I felt watching Deb's face crumble under that tent, because it would be easy to tell you it felt like triumph, and it didn't, not really. It felt like relief with a bruise underneath it. I didn't want to be right about this. I would have traded every ounce of vindication in that moment for a version of my father's last year, where nobody had needed to forge anything at all, because everyone had simply been decent to begin with. The quieter moment came 3 weeks later, at the actual cabin, empty now except for me. Trent showed up unannounced on a Tuesday evening, sat down across from me at the same kitchen table where the mudroom folder had started this whole thing, and slid an envelope across to me. Inside was a card, my father's handwriting, the real one, pen lift and all, dated the January before he died. Renbear, if you're reading this, it means I never got around to saying it out loud, which sounds about right for me. The cabin's for both of you. It always was. I just never figured out how to make your mother comfortable with that while I was alive to referee it. I'm sorry I let that go on as long as I did. You were never the one I worried about. You were always the one who could take care of herself. I should have told you that meant something different than it sounded like. Trent hadn't known the card existed until he found it going through his mother's desk, looking, he told me quietly, not meeting my eyes, for anything that might help make this right. I didn't know about the forged one, he said. Not until it was already on the table. I should have said something that day. I didn't. He didn't defend his mother. He didn't ask me for anything. He just sat there and let the silence be honest, which, of everyone in that family, was maybe the first time anyone had managed that in 20 years. I believed him. Not because I'm naive, because I've spent my whole career learning to tell the difference between a person performing regret and a person actually carrying it. His hands were shaking. That doesn't fake well. Here's what I learned, standing in a tent full of shrimp cocktail and forged paperwork. Love that has to keep proving itself with numbers was never really love to begin with. It was accounting. And the people who truly love you don't need a signature to make it true. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to her final chapter, because there's another one waiting for you next week.